Jose, thank you very, very much for that warm welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, it's wonderful to meet you today. I'm speaking to you from Cape Town in South Africa. And what I want to talk to you about today is our neighbor. I want to talk to you about Antarctica, and I say our neighbor, and the reason for that is that everybody is a neighbor of Antarctica. And the reason for that is because what happens in Antarctica will literally determine the future of our planet. So in January, myself and Jose Maria Figueres and a Russian called Slava Fetisov, we went down to Antarctica for me to undertake a swim to launch a campaign to protect 3 big areas in Antarctica. But let me just take you back a few years. A few years ago, I went down to the Ross Sea. Now the Ross Sea, nobody's ever heard of the Ross Sea, but it's literally one of the most incredible places on this planet. If you sail from the bottom of New Zealand and you sail from 40 degrees south to 50 degrees south to 60 degrees south to 70, eventually on the horizon, you will see these most incredible mountains of Antarctica. And if you carry on sailing along that coastline, you will enter one of the most unbelievable wilderness areas left on this planet. There you'll see these beautiful emperor penguins with the beautiful golden bow ties, the white chests. You'll see humpback whales coming out of the water. It is like man has never touched it. But the problem with this area is that this area and the areas around Antarctica are now being impacted by 2 big things: the impact of climate change and also the impact of industrial overfishing. Throughout the world's oceans now, we've seen these big industrial fishing fleets come in and literally take out all the fish. And so back in 2015, I went there to do a swim to try and get this area protected. Now, under international law, there are 25 nations who govern Antarctica, plus the European Union. And these 25 nations, it took a long time. It took 17 years for them to finally agree to protect this wonderful area. And this area is huge. The Ross Sea is as big as Britain, France, Germany, Italy, all put together. And this is the largest protected area in the world. And after we helped create this area, myself, Jose Maria Figueres and Slava Fetisov said, we must keep pushing. We must keep protecting all the other vulnerable areas around Antarctica. And so the next area which we wanted to protect is East Antarctica. And so in January, Jose Maria Figueres, Slava Fetisov from Russia, and my whole team came to Cape Town. And we got on a plane at the bottom of Africa, and we flew 4 hours south to Antarctica. And after 4 hours, we looked outside the windows and we could see the little bits of ice in the ocean. And then eventually we could see bigger icebergs. And then finally, we saw this most magnificent view. And these are the mountains of Antarctica. And we landed our aeroplane behind these mountains. As we came in, what we could see, though, was these incredible big lakes appearing all over the ice sheet. So all over the East Antarctic ice sheet now, these lakes are appearing. So these are water beginning to melt on top of the ice sheet, and it's been caused by climate change. And scientists from Britain now, they have discovered 65,000 of these lakes on top of the ice sheet. And so what I do is I go and do a swim in these places to highlight what's happening there. And I swim in just my swimming costume. I don't swim in a wetsuit or a dry suit. And so obviously these swims take a huge amount of preparation. The media cover the swim, and then afterwards I go to the countries who I want to urge them to agree to protect these areas, and I try and persuade the media and the politicians to agree to protect these areas. And so now the mission was to go and do a swim down in East Antarctica and get the last 2 countries to agree it. So we are really very, very close to an international agreement. It's so exciting. This agreement, so now 23 countries have agreed it. There are just 2 more countries which still have to agree it, Russia and China. So the first thing I did when I went down there is I spent a week down there getting my body used to this environment. And this isn't like swimming in a normal swimming pool. This water is incredibly cold. So I don't know if you can see this. There's a picture of me swimming there in this enormous great river, which is going across the Antarctic ice sheet. And this water is this incredible turquoise blue, but it's ice cold. The water is 0 degrees centigrade. And I swam in there for a few days, getting my body ready. And then the whole team arrived. And now we were going to do the main swim. And what we noticed was that these rivers are running across the top of the ice sheet. But sometimes what happens is that the warm water goes through the ice sheet. A hole literally appears and it goes all the way down to the bottom, to the rock. And then that rock, that water then goes underneath on top of the rock and it goes all the way out to sea. So it creates these rivers, go along the top. They then go down these holes, which we call moulins, goes all the way to the bottom. And what it does, and this is the reason why it's so worrying, it lubricates the rock and makes this whole ice sheet unstable. There are 3 big ice sheets in the world. In Greenland, in the Arctic, there's one in East Antarctica, and there's one in West Antarctica. And this is what is worrying the scientists, that these ice sheets now are becoming unstable because these lakes and rivers are appearing on the top. It lubricates the bottom, and they're worried about these ice sheets now melting and moving into the sea. 2 weeks after I did this swim in Antarctica, the air temperature in Antarctica was 20 degrees centigrade. Think about that. The air temperature in Antarctica, in the coldest continent on this earth, was 20 degrees north. Now, last week in the Arctic, at the top of the world, in a place called Svalbard, in the Norwegian Arctic, they have just had 21 degrees centigrade. So both polar regions are beginning to melt very, very quickly. This is what is worrying the scientists, because what is happening there will impact all of us all over the world. It'll impact every person on the planet, every single future generation, and the whole of the animal kingdom. If you're living in a coastal city like London, if you're living in Florida, if you're living in New York, these type of cities which are close and onto the ocean, these areas are very, very vulnerable now because of climate change. Places like Bangladesh also, with large populations right next to the ocean, extremely vulnerable now to this climate change and the melting of the Arctic and the Antarctic. So what we found was this river went underneath the ice and then came out a little bit further down underneath this big mountain of ice. And I decided that the very, very best way of showing world leaders what was happening was by swimming underneath the ice. And so this is a photograph of me about to swim underneath that ice. And I can tell you something. So I've got about 50 meters of ice above me. I've got ice to the left. I've got ice to the right. That water is 0 degrees centigrade. And now I'm going to start swimming down this tunnel. You know, it's the moments which challenge us the most, which define us. And I remember that feeling of huge fear as I entered that tunnel. This is a photograph of me swimming down that tunnel. That hand there is this hand here. The water is so cold. It's very, very difficult to breathe in this environment. But what I noticed down this tunnel was just these incredible colors. This tunnel went underneath the ice, And then it started turning and moving and meandering underneath the ice. And the tunnel started this turquoise blue. And then they went to a rich, rich royal blue. And then suddenly I came around another corner and it was this beautiful indigo. And I looked up and it was every single color you could imagine. And then finally, at the end of the tunnel, I can see this white light. And then finally, I was able to emerge out of the end of the tunnel after over 10 minutes of swimming. There's my friend Slava Fetisov, who pulled me out of the water. It is so cold, so incredibly cold. I think, when people ask me, how long does it take you to recover after a swim like that? The answer to that is that once you've been really, really, really cold, you never quite warm up again. It's deep in your bones. 1 week later, this is a photograph of me in Russia, beginning the discussions with the Russian government to urge them to join the rest of the 23 nations who govern Antarctica, to urge them to protect this last great wilderness on this earth. This year is the 200-year anniversary of the discovery of Antarctica. And it was a Russian explorer, Admiral Bellinghausen, who discovered Antarctica. And so I said to them, there can be no better time now to protect Antarctica, to leave a lasting legacy than this year. Imagine if we had no national parks in the world. Imagine if we didn't have the Serengeti National Park in Tanzania. Or imagine if we didn't have Yellowstone in North America. These enormous national parks which have preserved the most wonderful parts of the world. Imagine if we hadn't protected them about 100, 150 years ago. The world would be a very, very different place. It would be a very poorer place. When the world leaders 150 years ago started creating these great big national parks on land, we forgot to do that in the oceans. And now we're in a race against time to create these marine protected areas. And my message to the Russian government, so this is myself and this is Slava Fetisov. And here we are with two of the big decision makers. On the left-hand side over here is Dmitry Peskov, who is President Putin's press secretary. And next to him is Sergei Ivanov. Now, Sergei Ivanov started with President Putin in the KGB. He rose up the ranks to become the defense minister. He then became President Putin's chief of staff. And recently, President Putin appointed him to be in charge of ecology, environmental issues. And I said to him, we have a responsibility now to protect these last wilderness areas on this earth. And we have a small window to protect them. I'm seeing the oceans change so quickly. I said, now is the time. I'd like to end off by just telling you another story, just going completely away from Antarctica to a place where I grew up as a young boy. So I grew up in England. I'm speaking to you from South Africa, but I grew up in England. Near where I grew up is an incredible cathedral. It is, at the time it was built, so it was built 800 years ago. At the time it was built, it was the tallest building in the world. It's an incredible cathedral. And this year, 2020, was going to be the 200-year anniversary, or is the 200-year anniversary of the building of this cathedral. And I recently watched a program on television where the bishop who runs this cathedral was talking about it. And he said that the cathedral was built over a period of 38 years. So from when they first started building that cathedral, cutting the rocks and putting the rocks down and building that tall cathedral, it took them just 38 years. And he said it was the work of one generation. It was the work of just one generation. And it made me think, the people who built that cathedral, well, there were people who cut the rock. There were the people who transported the rock from where it was cut. There were the stonemasons. There were the people who put the beautiful roof on. There were the people who put the glass on the windows. And 800 years ago, just one generation built that incredible building. And it made me think about the work which myself, Jose Maria Figueres, Slava Fetisov, Pascal Lamy, a French diplomat, and so many of us are doing. We are this one generation who are going to build these protected areas in our oceans. So like 150 years ago when the national parks were built, now is the time for us to build these protected areas. Here's the point. We can't do it together. We can't do it on our own. It takes the 25 nations to do it. It takes men and women in those 25 nations to stand up and to say, this is right. This is just. This is what we should be doing for ourselves, for our children, and also for the incredible wildlife that lives down in Antarctica. This is a picture. I love penguins. I spend an awful lot of time with penguins. I can't get bored of penguins because they're just so absolutely incredible. But for me, this is a question about justice. We have no right, we have absolutely no right to push these incredible animals into extinction. And unless we actually protect these last areas, these beautiful animals, which make the world so diverse, on which our planet relies, will go extinct. And so my message, I'll end off now, we can then ask some questions. But my message to all of you here is please join myself and Jose Maria Figueres and Slava Fetisov and Pascal Lamy. Please join us in being part of that generation that builds these incredible protected areas in our oceans. Thank you all so much.